Faith Langley read the email over and over again before sending it. Her proposal for optimizing the internal time tracking system was clearly laid out, with technical details and calculations of potential savings. She had spent 3 evenings working on it instead of watching the new season of The Crown. Taking a deep breath, she clicked send and glanced at the clock. 8:30 a.m. Most of the TechStream employees hadn't arrived at the office yet. The open space gradually filled up. Jarvis from the testing department walked past Faith's desk without even glancing in her direction, even though she greeted him with a nod. 15 minutes later, Connor arrived, throwing his backpack on the desk next to hers and loudly discussing Sunday's game with someone on the phone. Faith grimaced at his loud laughter but said nothing. Until 9:45, the glass office in the corner remained empty. Reed Merrick was almost as famous for his tardiness as he was for his ability to blame it on his subordinates. When he finally showed up, he immediately called an impromptu meeting, right between the desks. "Good morning, team," he said with feigned energy. "What's on the agenda today?" Faith raised her hand, but Reed pointedly ignored her. "Yes, Connor?" "I'm finishing up the notification module you asked for," he replied. "It'll be ready by lunchtime." "Great." Reed made a note on his tablet. "Brandon?" "Working on integrating the new payment system API," replied the man with a coffee cup in his hand. "Deadline?" "I'll definitely have it done by the end of the week." Faith raised her hand again. Reed glanced around at everyone else, and when there was no one left to ask, he reluctantly nodded to her. "Yes, Vera." "Faith," she corrected, trying to keep her voice steady. "I sent you a proposal for optimizing the accounting system. According to my calculations, it could save up to 20% of server resources." Reed slid his finger across the tablet screen, pretending to check his email. "I don't see that email." "When did you send it?" "This morning at 8:30. "That's strange," he shrugged. "Okay, send it again." "Anyone else?" A meaningful glance in the direction of Jason, Reed's favorite, and he began to talk about his minor successes in refactoring code that already worked. Faith returned to her monitor, opened her email, and confirmed that the email had indeed been sent. What's more, the system showed that Reed had opened it at 9:26. She took a sip of her now-cold coffee from her thermos. After 2 years at TechStream, she had stopped being surprised by things like this. After lunch, when Reed left for an important meeting, everyone knew that meant lunch at an expensive restaurant with someone from management, Faith felt a light touch on her shoulder. She turned and saw Ashton Dunn, a quiet programmer with whom she sometimes exchanged knowing glances at meetings. "I overheard your suggestion this morning," he said, sitting down on the edge of her desk. "It sounds interesting. Can you tell me more?" Over the next 15 minutes, Faith explained the essence of her idea. Ashton asked the right questions and really listened. It was so unusual that she even doubted his sincerity. "This could really take some serious load off the server," he said after she finished explaining. "You know, with the same code, we could apply this logic to the Apex project." Apex Logistics was their largest client. Faith had never worked directly on that project. Reed made sure all the interesting tasks were assigned to his guys. "Theoretically, yes," she replied. "But I need more data about their database structure." "I can help with that." Ashton lowered his voice. "I have access to the diagrams. If you want, I can send you an anonymized version." "Won't that violate the NDA?" "Not if the data is anonymized," he smiled. "Think about it. That kind of optimization for Apex is a whole new level." Faith spent the rest of the day doing routine work and thinking about Ashton's offer. At 6 in the evening, as the office began to empty, her phone vibrated. The screen lit up with Mom. Faith hesitated for a few seconds before answering. "Hi, Mom." "You finally deigned to pick up." Lydia Langley's voice sounded irritated, even though the conversation had just begun. "I called you yesterday." "Sorry, I was busy." Faith began gathering her things, tucking the phone between her ear and her shoulder. "What could you possibly be doing on a Sunday? Oh, let me guess. Sitting in front of your computer, ruining your eyes." "I was working on a project," Faith replied, trying not to react to the familiar reproach. Sure, all you ever do is work. So did you get a raise? or at least a bonus. Faith left the office and headed for the elevator. No, not yet. Not surprising. I told you should have gone to accounting like I advised. A stable job with clear prospects, but you're always with your computers. The elevator arrived and Faith stepped inside, glad that no one else was there. Mom, everything's fine really. I'm doing okay. Doing okay? Her mother's voice sounded unconvinced. By the way, Laura got a raise. Do you know how much? 15%. That's what happens when you choose a normal profession instead of chasing after buzzwords. Laura was her mother's friend's daughter, and the eternal standard by which Lydia compared Faith. The fact that Laura worked for her father's company was somehow never taken into account. I'm happy for her, Faith said as she stepped out of the elevator and headed for the building's exit. How's your health? What do you mean, my health? Nobody cares. My back hurts, my blood pressure is all over the place. The doctor says I need to go to a health resort. But who's going to pay for a health resort? Faith sighed. She regularly sent money to her mother, although she never admitted it directly. I transferred it to you last week. If you need more, I can... That's enough. Don't go on, Lydia interrupted. I'm not a beggar. I'll manage somehow, as I always have. The conversation continued in the same vein for another 20 minutes until Faith reached her apartment. By then, she felt emotionally drained, as she always did after talking to her mother. After a simple dinner of reheated frozen lasagna, Faith sat down at her home computer. Usually, at this time of day, she would browse technical forums or watch educational videos. But today, her thoughts kept returning to her conversation with Ashton. She opened her email and found a message from him. As promised, read the subject line. Attached was an archive containing anonymized diagrams of the Apex Logistics database. The next 3 hours flew by. Faith studied the data structure, took notes, and thought about possible optimizations. Gradually, an idea began to form in her head that was much more ambitious than simply saving server resources. Apex's logistics system tracked thousands of trucks and tens of thousands of deliveries every day. They used standard routing algorithms, but Faith saw how they could be significantly improved by dynamically reallocating resources based on real-time traffic and weather data. At 1 o'clock in the morning, she leaned back in her chair, feeling the excitement that always came with a new and interesting challenge. She grabbed her notebook and began jotting down the main components of her algorithm. For the first time in a long time, Faith felt like she could create something truly meaningful, something that couldn't be ignored or taken away, something that would prove to everyone, her mother, Reed Merrick, and everyone else who had underestimated her, that she wasn't just an invisible female programmer who could be overlooked in meetings. For the next 2 weeks, Faith practically lived and breathed her project. At work, she performed her routine tasks quickly and without enthusiasm, saving her mental energy for evenings she devoted entirely to her new algorithm. Ashton periodically checked in on her progress and even offered advice a few times when she ran into difficulties. On Wednesday of the 3rd week of work on the project, Faith stayed late at the office. Everyone else had gone home, and she could finally run performance tests on her algorithm using a more powerful work computer. The results exceeded her wildest expectations. On the test data, the algorithm showed a 32% improvement in route efficiency. She was so absorbed in analyzing the results that she didn't notice someone approaching from behind. Working late? Faith jumped and turned around. Reed Merrick stood a few steps away with a satisfied smile. What's so interesting? Faith instinctively closed the window with the results. Just checking something for tomorrow's release, she lied. Reed moved closer, leaning his hands on her desk and invading her personal space. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, Faith, he said in a tone he probably thought was friendly. You've been with us for a long time, but you're still in the starting position. Have you ever wondered why? Faith tensed. I guess the company has its own criteria for promotion. Exactly, Reed snapped his fingers. And you know what I've noticed? You never show any initiative. You're always in the shadows. You do what you're told, but you never offer anything of your own. Liar, Faith thought, remembering the dozens of ideas and suggestions she had sent him over the past 2 years. I send you my ideas regularly, she said aloud, including the proposal to optimize the accounting system that I sent 2 weeks ago. Oh, that. Reed waved his hand. Too complicated for the current architecture. We need practical solutions, not theoretical calculations. Now, if you could come up with something truly innovative. He paused, watching her reaction closely. Faith hesitated. Part of her wanted to tell him about her new algorithm to get the recognition she deserved, but something in Reed's expression made her wary, as if he knew more than he was saying. I'll think about it, she finally replied. Great. Don't stay late. Tomorrow was a big day. Representatives from Apex Logistics were coming to visit. When he left, Faith reopened the window with the test results. It was a strange coincidence that Reed had mentioned the very thing she was working on. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Or had Ashton let something slip? After gathering her things, she decided to finish her work at home. On her way out of the building, Faith stopped at Reed's office. The light was on, and through the half-open door she could see him at his computer. His face, illuminated by the screen, looked focused and smug. Something told her that there were no coincidences. Thursday morning began with commotion in the office. By 8 o'clock, all TechStream employees were at their desks, which was extremely unusual for the company. Faith sat down at her computer, feeling a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The visit from Apex Logistics was clearly an important event. Expensive pastries had appeared in the kitchen, and new plants had been placed in the conference room. Are you nervous? Ashton asked quietly, stopping at her desk. Faith glanced at him intently. Why would I be? Just asking, he shrugged. I heard Reed is preparing something big for today's presentation. Really? What exactly? No idea. Ashton paused, but he looks very pleased with himself. That's usually not a good sign. Before Faith could respond, Reed Merrick emerged from his glass office. He was wearing a dark blue suit instead of his usual jeans and polo shirt, a sure sign that the meeting was indeed important. Everyone to their places, he said in a commanding tone. The guests will be here in an hour. Jason, Brandon, Connor, come to my office. We need to discuss the presentation. His gaze slid over Faith as if she didn't exist and settled on Ashton. And you too, Dunn. I have some questions about integration. When the 4 men disappeared into Reed's office, Faith was left alone in her corner of the office. She opened her work email and began scanning her messages, though her mind was far away. Over the past 2 weeks, her work on the logistics route optimization algorithm had progressed significantly. She had created a prototype that showed impressive results on simulation data. Last night, after a strange conversation with Reed, she decided not to keep all her files on her work computer. She transferred some of the code to her personal cloud drive and wrote down the key algorithmic solutions in an encrypted document. Something told her to be careful. It was almost 10 in the morning, time for the guests to arrive. The office was tense. Finally, accompanied by a secretary, 3 men in formal suits appeared. Reed personally went out to greet them, showering them with compliments. Mr. Holder, what an honor! Welcome to TechStream. The eldest of the visitors, a tall man with graying temples and an authoritative gaze, nodded reservedly. Merrick, I hope we won't be wasting our time. Oh, I assure you our presentation is worth every minute. The group disappeared into a large conference room. Faith could see through the glass walls as they sat down around a table. Reed gestured animatedly, pointing at something on the projector. Then Jason, Brandon, and Connor entered the room, but Ashton was not among them. Want to know what's going on? Ashton's voice sounded unexpectedly close, making Faith jump. God, you scared me, she gasped. Shouldn't you be in there with them? They let me out. They said the technical details weren't necessary at this stage, he said, his voice strangely tense. Come on, I want to show you something. He led Faith to his workstation in the far corner of the office. Opening a browser on his computer, he logged into the corporate document management system. Look, he said, turning the screen toward her. Faith saw a document titled Innovative Logistics Route Optimization System for Apex Logistics. The author was Reed Merrick. What's this? She asked, though she already suspected the answer. Open it and take a look. Ashton clicked on the file. The document contained a detailed description of the algorithm, her algorithm with a few cosmetic changes, but the essence remained the same. Everything she had been working on for the past few weeks was neatly formatted and presented as Reed Merrick's invention. This is my project, she gasped, feeling the blood rush to her face. How did he even find out about it? Ashton lowered his eyes. Probably through me, but not directly. I would never, he faltered. He could have had access to my messages, or to your computer when you weren't there. How long has this document been here? Judging by the metadata, it was uploaded 3 days ago, but the last changes were made last night. Faith remembered seeing Reed in his office late that evening. It all added up. He stole my idea, she said slowly, still not believing what was happening, and now he's selling it to Apex as his own. It looks that way. Ashton looked guilty. But I've taken steps. He opened another file, an archive containing dated copies of all versions of Faith's code. I saved every version you showed me, with the original timestamps. It clearly shows that you were working on this long before Reed created his document. Faith felt a rush of gratitude. Thank you, Ashton, but what do I do now? You can try to assert your rights publicly, but you know Reed. He'll deny everything. Faith glanced toward the conference room. The presentation was in full swing. Reed stood in front of the screen, pointing to a graph she had created just a week ago. Vance Holder and his entourage listened intently, taking notes. I have to do something, she said resolutely. Right now. Wait! Ashton grabbed her arm. Don't get carried away. Reed has probably prepared for this scenario. He has defenses. What defenses? I don't know exactly, but I heard him tell Jason that everything is taken care of, and even if she tries to prove anything, it won't work. Faith hesitated. On the one hand, every minute of delay gave Reed an advantage. On the other hand, she didn't want to act rashly and ruin everything. Okay, she said finally. Let's wait until the presentation is over, but I'm not going to let this go. They returned to their desks. Faith spent the next 2 hours on edge, periodically glancing at the conference room. Finally, the meeting ended. Vance Holder shook Reed's hand, a clear sign of a positive outcome. When the guests left the office, Reed gathered the entire team. Great news, everyone, he announced with a triumphant smile. Apex Logistics is impressed with our proposal to optimize their routing system. They are ready to sign a contract for the full version. The employees applauded. Faith stood motionless, feeling anger building inside her. And I must say, Reed continued, special thanks to Jason and Brandon for their help in preparing the demonstration. The project I've been working on for the last few months has finally been recognized. That was too much. Faith stepped forward. Excuse me, Mr. Merrick, she said loudly and clearly, but this project is my work. The office fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Reed slowly turned, his smile turning cold. Excuse me, Miss Langley. The logistics route optimization algorithm you just sold to Apex is my design. I've been working on it for the last 3 weeks. Reed laughed dramatically. What an amazing coincidence. And where is the proof of your authorship? I have all the versions of the code with timestamps, Faith replied, and a witness who can confirm that I was working on this project long before your presentation. She glanced at Ashton, but he looked frightened. Is that so? Reed's smile faded. I have documentation dated 3 months earlier describing the concept for this algorithm. Furthermore, he raised his voice, I have CCTV footage showing you staying in the office after hours and copying files from my computer. Faith froze at such a brazen lie. What? That's absurd. I never— By the way, Reed interrupted her, I was just about to talk to you about this incident in a more private setting, but since you've decided to make a public scene— He took a flash drive out of his pocket. Here's a copy of the video. Would you like us to show it to all the employees right now? Faith looked around in confusion. Her colleagues stared at her with bewilderment and condemnation. Even Tessa, with whom she sometimes had lunch, looked away. It's fake, Faith said, but her voice no longer sounded so confident. I can prove that the algorithm is mine. Really? Reed took a step toward her. And I can prove that you violated corporate confidentiality policy and attempted to steal company intellectual property. Who do you think they'll believe? He glanced around at the others. No one said a word in Faith's defense. I suggest you get back to work, Miss Langley, Reed said in a tone that brooked no argument. And stop by my office this evening. We'll discuss your future at TechStream. With that, he turned and left, leaving Faith standing in the middle of the office under the gaze of her colleagues. Gradually, everyone returned to their work, but the atmosphere had clearly changed. Now they looked at her as if she were a traitor. Faith slowly returned to her desk. Her hands were shaking with anger and humiliation. She opened her email and saw a new message from Reed sent to all employees. In connection with the incident, I would like to remind you of the company's confidentiality policy and the inadmissibility of unauthorized access to other people's materials. Violators will be held accountable. Ashton appeared quietly beside her. I'm sorry, he whispered. I thought we had proof, but he thought of everything. Did you see that recording? Faith asked. Does it really exist? I don't know, but if it does, it's definitely fake. I know you didn't steal his files. Faith nodded, grateful for his support, however weak. What should I do now? I don't know, Ashton replied honestly. But I saved copies of all your files, and not just on my work computer. I have a backup on my personal drive. It was a ray of hope in a dark realm of despair. Thank you, Ashton. I won't forget this. The rest of the day passed in agonizing anticipation. Faith tried to work, but her thoughts kept returning to the upcoming conversation with Reed. What was he going to offer her? Termination? A demotion? Or just another dose of humiliation? At 6 o'clock, when most of the employees had already left, she headed for Reed's office. Taking a deep breath, Faith knocked on the door. Come in, came the voice from inside. Reed was sitting at his desk, looking through some documents. He pointed to the chair opposite him. Have a seat, Miss Langley. Faith sat down, maintaining her composure, although her heart was beating like crazy. I must say, Reed began, leaning back in his chair, I was disappointed by your behavior today. Publicly accusing a manager of intellectual property theft is a serious allegation. It's the truth, Faith said firmly. I created that algorithm. You know it, and I know it. Reed smiled, but his eyes remained cold. You know what's interesting about the corporate world, Miss Langley? It's that the truth doesn't matter. All that matters is what can be proven. And who is believed. He opened a desk drawer and took out a folder. I have all the documentation for this project here, dated well before you supposedly started working on it. I have witnesses who can confirm that I discussed this concept with them 3 months ago. And yes, I do have surveillance footage of you sitting at my computer. It doesn't matter what you did, he interrupted. It matters how it looks on tape and how I interpret it. Now, let's get down to business. Reed leaned forward. You have 2 options. First, you admit defeat, issue a public apology for your behavior today, and continue working as if nothing happened, but under strict supervision. Second, I hand all the material over to security and legal. Guess how that will end for your career? Faith felt a lump rise in her throat. Everything she had worked for, everything she had achieved, and now this man could destroy it all with a wave of his hand. What about the truth? She asked quietly. The truth? Reed laughed. In this business, the truth belongs to those with power, connections, and proof. You have none of those things. He paused. By the way, don't think your friend Dunn is going to help you. He values his job too much to risk it for some female programmer. He uttered the last words with undisguised contempt. I'll give you until tomorrow to decide. Reed continued. In the meantime, you can go. Faith stood up, feeling devastated. She stopped at the door and turned around. You know, Mr. Merrick, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, the algorithm you presented has a serious flaw in its handling of peak loads. Without my latest changes, it will crash under high traffic. Reed frowned. Are you trying to threaten me? No, Faith replied, just stating a fact. You stole an incomplete version. With that, she left the office, leaving Reed deep in thought. Ashton was waiting for her in the hallway. How did it go? he asked anxiously. Just as expected, Faith replied. He threatened to destroy my career if I didn't admit defeat. What are you going to do? Faith looked at him for a long time. I haven't decided yet, but I'm definitely not going to give up. They left the building together in the evening twilight of Dallas. Faith didn't have a clear plan, but she knew one thing. Reed Merrick wasn't going to get her algorithm that easily, even if it meant turning the whole world upside down. The next 2 weeks at TechStream turned into a nightmare for Faith. After a successful presentation and signing a contract with Apex Logistics, Reed Merrick was promoted to Director of Technology, which made him even more confident and ruthless. On Monday morning, he gathered the entire team to discuss a new project. All the developers sat in the conference room, waiting for instructions. So, colleagues, Reed began, pacing in front of the projector screen, thanks to my logistics route optimization algorithm, we now have the largest contract in the company's history. He paused, glancing briefly at Faith, who was sitting in the far corner of the table. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and I will assign tasks according to your qualifications and loyalty. At the last word, several people shifted uncomfortably. Everyone remembered the public confrontation between Faith and Reed 2 weeks earlier. Jason, you will lead the development of the main module, Reed continued. Brandon, you're in charge of the interface. Connor, you're responsible for integration with the existing Apex system. He methodically assigned all the key roles, ignoring Faith until the very end. And you, Miss Langley, he finally said with barely concealed contempt, will be in charge of documentation. I think it's a task that suits your abilities. Suppressed laughter rippled through the room. Documentation was the least favorite part of a programmer's job, routine, tedious, and requiring no creative thinking. It was a blatant demotion. I have extensive experience in developing optimization algorithms, Faith objected, trying to sound calm. I could be more useful working on the main engine. Reed smiled his cold smile. Unfortunately, Miss Langley, after your recent behavior, I cannot entrust you with such a responsible task. The documentation is my final decision. The meeting was adjourned. As she left the conference room, Faith caught the sympathetic glances of some of her colleagues, but no one dared to speak up in her defense. Ashton caught up with her at the coffee machine. I'm sorry, he said quietly. It's not fair. It doesn't matter, Faith replied, although inside she was seething with indignation. I'll manage. He's deliberately trying to get you fired. I know, but I won't give him the satisfaction. The next few days confirmed Ashton's words. Reed methodically tried to make Faith's work unbearable. He demanded that she redo her paperwork over and over again, finding new things to criticize. At staff meetings, he ignored her suggestions or ridiculed them in front of everyone. On Thursday, Reed called Faith into his office. I've reviewed your documentation on the routing module, he said, without even offering her a seat. This is completely unacceptable. What exactly is wrong with it? Faith asked. I followed all corporate standards. The exception handling process is not described in sufficient detail. He threw the printouts on the table. Rewrite it and have it on my desk by 8 tomorrow morning. But that's over 100 pages, Faith protested. That's at least 3 days' work. You heard me, Miss Langley. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, otherwise I'll consider you sabotaging the project. Faith spent the entire night rewriting the documentation. Her eyes hurt and her back ached, but by 7:30 a.m. on Friday, she placed the updated folder on Reed's desk. At 10 a.m., he called her back. This is still unsatisfactory, he said, not hiding his pleasure. You added the exception descriptions, but now the sorting algorithm isn't detailed enough. Redo it by Monday. By the end of the second week of this treatment, Faith was physically and emotionally exhausted. She had barely slept, working nights to meet Reed's impossible demands. Her colleagues began to avoid her, afraid of falling out of favor with the new director of technology. The only one who still supported her was Ashton, although he was forced to be cautious. They communicated mainly through encrypted messages or met in cafes away from the office. You can't keep working like this, Ashton said during one such meeting. He's just trying to break you. What am I supposed to do? Faith asked wearily. Quit and let him win. Maybe you should talk to HR, or go straight to the CEO. Faith smiled bitterly. Reed has covered his bases too well. He has evidence that I tried to steal his design. Plus, after signing the contract with Apex, he became management's favorite. No one is going to listen to some low-level programmer. What about contacting Apex directly? Tell them the truth? Who would believe me without proof? Faith sighed. Besides, Reed warned me that it would be considered industrial espionage and an attempt at sabotage. He's just waiting for an excuse to destroy my reputation in the industry. At that moment, her phone rang. The screen displayed Mom. Faith hesitated for a moment, but then answered. Hi, Mom. Finally, Lydia Langley's displeased voice rang out. I've been calling you for 3 days straight. What are you so busy doing that you can't answer your own mother? I'm sorry, I'm going through a difficult period at work, Faith replied wearily, gesturing to Ashton that she needed to talk in private. She stepped out of the cafe, pressing the phone to her ear. You always say that, Lydia grumbled. All you ever do is work. What's the point? Mom, I'm really tired. Can we talk later? Sure. You always have more important things to do than talk to your mother. Lydia's voice sounded familiar to Faith. I just wanted to tell you that Laura got a promotion. She's now the deputy finance director. Faith closed her eyes, feeling her temples begin to throb. I'm happy for her. See? If you had listened to me and gone into finance instead of messing around with computers, now what? How long have you been in the same position? 2 years? 3? Mom, I really don't have the energy for this right now. Oh, forgive me, how generous. Lydia's voice turned icy. I'm just worried about you. You've always been different, always with your head in the clouds, and now you've apparently drifted away from me completely. I haven't drifted away, Faith replied wearily. It's just a very difficult time right now. Who doesn't? My blood pressure is all over the place, my back hurts, and my upstairs neighbor flooded my apartment for the 3rd time. Who's going to fix it? Me, of course, because my daughter is busy with her computers. That was the last straw. Faith felt tears welling up in her eyes. Mom, I'm sorry, I have to go. I'll call you later. She hung up without waiting for a response and stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, trying to pull herself together. When she returned to the cafe, Ashton looked at her with concern. Are you okay? Yes, just family stuff. Listen, Ashton lowered his voice. I've found out something. Reed is planning a major reorganization of the department. There are rumors of layoffs. Faith smiled grimly. Let me guess. I'm first on the list? I'm afraid so, but nothing concrete yet. Just keep your eyes open. On Monday morning, Faith discovered that her access to the main development systems had been restricted. She could only work with the documentation section. All other modules were closed to her. This was another one of Reed's tactics to isolate her from the team and important work. By the middle of the week, the situation had gotten even worse. At a staff meeting, Reed publicly criticized the quality of her documentation, saying that she was slowing down the entire development process, and that he had to spend valuable time fixing her mistakes. On Wednesday evening, Faith stayed late at the office and overheard Reed talking to someone from management. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but as she was walking past the conference room, she heard her name and stopped involuntarily. Langley is clearly not up to the job, Reed said. I gave her the simplest task and she can't even do that properly. Are you sure the problem is with her and not your attitude? Asked another voice that Faith didn't recognize. Absolutely. Reed's voice sounded confident. What's more, I have reason to believe she's been trying to sabotage the project. Remember that incident with her algorithm? Yes, you mentioned it. Her work has gotten even worse since then. I think she's getting back at me for exposing her. What do you suggest we do? Put her on the list of positions to be cut during the reorganization. We have every reason to do so. Unsatisfactory performance, inability to adapt to new requirements, plus the incident with the attempted appropriation of someone else's intellectual property. Faith felt the blood drain from her face. All this time, Reed had been deliberately preparing her dismissal, making her look incompetent. Okay, said the second voice after a pause. Put her on the list, but make sure everything is done by the book. No personal scores, just business. Of course, Reed replied, with a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Everything will be strictly according to protocol. Faith cautiously moved away from the door and quickly headed for her desk. She was shaking with anger and humiliation. So all this time, Reed hadn't just been tormenting her. He had been methodically gathering evidence of her incompetence so he could fire her with good reason. She opened her computer and began searching the corporate document system for any records of a planned reorganization. In the HR section, she found a folder labeled Confidential Technology Department Restructuring. The file was password protected, but Faith noticed that the document had been created by Reed Merrick. Maybe he used his usual password? After a few tries, she managed to gain access. The document contained a list of employees recommended for dismissal. Her name was first on the list, marked Priority Reduction. The Reasons column listed all of Reed's complaints about her over the past few weeks, as well as attempted theft of company intellectual property. Faith's gaze fell on the date the document was created. It had been written a week before she'd even started working on the route optimization algorithm. This was irrefutable proof that Reed had been planning her dismissal long before the incident with the theft of his idea. Moreover, it could indicate that he had been deliberately monitoring her work in order to take credit for her development, knowing that he would soon be getting rid of her. Faith took a screenshot of the document and sent it to her personal email. Then she closed the file and logged out, trying not to leave any traces of her intrusion. The next morning, Faith arrived at the office determined to confront Reed. She was not going to accept her dismissal for alleged incompetence without a fight. She now had proof of his deliberate actions. However, before she even had time to turn on her computer, she saw Reed approaching, accompanied by 2 security guards. "Miss Langley," he said in an official tone, loud enough to attract the attention of the entire office. "Last night, you illegally accessed confidential company documents. This is a serious violation of security policy." Faith felt all eyes turn to her. "What are you talking about?" she asked, even though she already knew what had happened. "The security system detected your access to the HR folder marked confidential." Reed looked almost triumphant. "This is grounds for immediate dismissal. Security will escort you out to gather your belongings." Faith stood up, trying to maintain her composure. "What about the reason I was looking for those documents?" she asked loudly. "What about the fact that you were planning to fire me even before my algorithm was stolen?" Whispers rippled through the office. Reed frowned. "Those are absurd accusations. You have no proof." "I have a screenshot of the document with the date it was created," Faith retorted. "You made a list of people to be fired a week before the theft incident." "Any materials obtained illegally have no legal standing," Reed replied coldly. "Furthermore, sending confidential company documents to your personal email is another serious violation." He knew about the screenshot. Somehow the monitoring system had detected it. "Miss Langley," Reed continued, clearly enjoying the moment, "you are fired for violating company security policy and attempting to steal corporate information. Security will ensure that you leave the building within 15 minutes. Faith glanced around the office. Most of her colleagues averted their eyes, not wanting to meet her gaze. Even Tessa, with whom she sometimes had lunch, stared at her monitor. Only Ashton looked at her with undisguised sympathy and anger. "Fine," Faith said, beginning to pack her belongings into a cardboard box provided by the security guard. "But know this, Mr. Merrick, the truth will come out sooner or later." "I'm afraid, Miss Langley," Reed lowered his voice as he moved closer, "that in this world, the truth belongs to those with power and influence, and you have neither." When Faith had finished gathering her things, Reed said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Accept it, loser. You have no evidence and no future in this industry." He laughed and then turned to the other employees. "I apologize for this unpleasant incident, colleagues. Let's get back to work. We have an important project and a tight deadline." Faith walked to the exit, accompanied by security guards, her head held high, although inside she was crumbling with humiliation and anger. At the door, she turned and saw Reed smiling as he returned to his office. Her career at TechStream was over, and with it, perhaps her entire professional future. Faith sat in her apartment, staring at her laptop screen. A week had passed since her humiliating dismissal from TechStream, but the pain and anger had not subsided. An untouched cup of long cold coffee sat on the table. The phone lying next to it vibrated periodically with notifications, but she paid no attention to it. Over the past week, Faith had sent at least 15 resumes to various technology companies in Dallas. Only 3 had responded, and all of them were polite rejections. No one had given a reason, but she suspected that Reed had taken care of her reputation. A sudden knock on the door snapped her out of her stupor. Faith reluctantly got up from the chair where she had been sitting for the last 5 hours and walked to the door. Glancing through the peephole, she recoiled in surprise, then quickly opened the door. "Ashton? What are you doing here?" Her former colleague was standing in the doorway, holding a small bag. He looked nervous and kept looking around. "Can I come in?" he asked. "I don't want to talk in the hallway." Faith stepped aside to let him in. Ashton quickly entered and only relaxed noticeably after she closed the door. "Sorry for the sudden visit," he said, placing the bag on the table. "I tried to call you, but you didn't answer." I'm not in the mood to talk," Faith admitted. "What happened? Did they fire you too?" Ashton shook his head. "No, not yet. But the atmosphere there is getting worse. Reed has gone off the rails, threatening everyone, intimidating everyone, and the Apex project is starting to fall apart." "What do you mean, fall apart?" The algorithm that Reed stole," Ashton corrected himself, "is unstable under heavy loads. You yourself pointed out that flaw, and now that they've started integrating it into the Apex system, the problems are coming to light. Reed is furious, blaming everyone, but he doesn't know how to fix the problem." Faith smiled faintly. There was some satisfaction in the fact that her prediction had come true. "And why did you come here? To tell me about it?" "Not only that." Ashton opened his bag and took out a flash drive. "I brought you something. It contains all versions of your code with timestamps, the original specifications, and even the logs of your commits. I saved it all back when I suspected Reed was up to something." Faith took the flash drive, feeling a jolt of electricity run down her spine, a mixture of hope and fear. This could prove I wrote it?" "Possibly, but not in court. Reed is right that TechStream legally retains the rights to any code you developed while working there, but it could help you in other ways." He took a folded piece of paper out of his pocket. "Here's a list of all the vulnerabilities and flaws in Reed's algorithm implementation. I compiled it while observing the work process. It doesn't include your latest optimizations, which only you know about." Faith unfolded the sheet and scanned the list. Indeed, many of the key elements she had worked on in the last week before Reed stole her project were missing. "Thank you, Ashton. But what am I supposed to do with this? I've been trying to find a job for a week, and no one's even called me in for an interview." Ashton sat down on the edge of the table, looking at her seriously. "I have an idea. I know someone at Apex Logistics. We went to college together, and he's a project manager there now. He can set you up with a meeting with the technical director." "Why?" Faith frowned. "What am I going to say to them? Hi, I'm the girl who actually created the algorithm that your former boss sold you? They'll just laugh and show me the door." "No," Ashton explained patiently. "You'll offer them an improved version of the algorithm, one that you can create knowing all the flaws in the current implementation. They're already facing problems and will be happy for a solution." Faith thought about it. The plan was risky, but it made sense. What if they just take my ideas and pass them on to Reed? "That's a risk," Ashton agreed. "But I think if you make a strong enough impression on their technical director, he may prefer to work directly with the creator of the algorithm rather than a middleman who doesn't even understand how it works." Faith was silent, thinking about the situation. Part of her wanted to just give up, forget about it all, and maybe move to another city to start over. But another part, the stubborn, proud part, craved justice and recognition. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's give it a try. Set up the meeting and I'll work on an improved version in the meantime. For the next 5 days, Faith was practically glued to her computer. Using the materials provided by Ashton and her deep understanding of the algorithm, she created a new and improved version of the logistics route optimization system. She fixed all the known flaws and added several innovative features that she hadn't even thought of initially. In her new version, the system could dynamically adapt to real-time traffic changes, take weather conditions into account, and even predict potential delays based on historical data. All of this significantly improved efficiency compared to the version Reed sold to Apex. On the 6th day, Ashton called. "The meeting is set for tomorrow at 10 in the morning," he said excitedly. "My friend Nate got you 15 minutes with the technical director. It's not much, but if you make a good impression, he might give you more time." "Wait." Faith felt her heart start to race. "You mean Vance Holder? The one who came to Reed's presentation?" "That's the one," Ashton confirmed. "He rarely meets with junior developers, but Nate told him you have a solution to the problems they're having with integrating the TechStream algorithm." That caught his attention. "Oh my God, Ashton, I'm not ready for this. I thought I'd be talking to some middle manager, not the owner of the company himself." "All the better," Ashton said confidently. "Holder is a techie at heart, even though he's mostly involved in business now. He'll appreciate your knowledge much more than some manager. Plus, he makes decisions quickly and isn't afraid to take risks if he sees potential benefits." After the call, Faith spent several hours preparing for the presentation. She created a clear presentation plan, highlighting the key advantages of her solution and the potential economic benefits for Apex Logistics. Then she prepared a short, technical demonstration showing how her algorithm handled high loads compared to Reed's version. In the morning, she carefully chose her outfit, a simple but elegant pantsuit that made her feel confident. For the first time in 2 weeks, Faith felt a surge of energy and hope. Apex Logistics was located in a modern glass and steel office building in downtown Dallas. Faith arrived 20 minutes before her appointment to go through the formalities with her pass and gather her thoughts. She was met in the lobby by Nate, Ashton's friend, a young man with a friendly smile and fashionable glasses. "Faith Langley?" He held out his hand. "Nice to meet you. Ashton has told me a lot about you." "I hope it's all good," Faith smiled nervously, shaking his hand. "Of course." Nate lowered his voice. "Listen, you really only have 15 minutes. Mr. Holder is very busy today, but if you make a good impression, he may extend the meeting. The main thing is to be specific and get straight to the point." "I understand. Thanks for the advice." Nate led her through security and several corridors to Vance Holder's office. Before entering, he smiled encouragingly. "Good luck, and don't be nervous. He values competence above all else." Holder's office was surprisingly modest for a man of his position. There was no fancy furniture or expensive paintings, just a functional space with a large desk, a few chairs, and a panoramic window overlooking the city. Vance Holder stood up when she entered. He was a tall man with graying temples and a penetrating gaze. He was dressed in a simple shirt without a tie and looked more like a professor than the head of a large corporation. "Miss Langley," he said, shaking her hand firmly, "Nate said you had an interesting proposal regarding our new routing system. We have 15 minutes, so let's get right to it." Faith took a deep breath and began. "Mr. Holder, I have developed a logistics route optimization algorithm that is significantly superior to the one you purchased from TechStream." Holder raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's a bold statement. Why do you think so?" "Because I know all the flaws in their solution." Faith decided to be blunt. "I was the one who originally created the algorithm that Reed Merrick sold to you." She expected skepticism or even outrage, but Holder just nodded thoughtfully. "Continue." Faith quickly opened her laptop and connected it to the projector on the conference table. "The algorithm you purchased has a serious flaw when processing peak loads. When the number of simultaneous routes exceeds a certain threshold, the system becomes unstable." Holder watched her closely. "We did encounter this problem during testing. This is because the code is missing a key component for dynamic resource reallocation," Faith explained. "This component was in my original design, but it wasn't included in the version you were sold." She launched a demonstration showing the system under load. The screen displayed a visualization of hundreds of routes being processed simultaneously. When the load reached a certain level, Reed's system began to fail, marked by red dots on the graph. Faith then switched to her version, which continued to run smoothly even when the load was doubled. "Impressive," Holder acknowledged, "but how can I be sure this isn't just a fancy simulation?" Faith was ready for this question. "I can provide you with the complete source code for analysis by your experts. What's more," she paused, "I can pinpoint the exact moment when the tech stream system will fail if you run it at full capacity." Holder leaned forward, clearly interested. "That's a very serious claim, Miss Langley. You understand that if you're wrong, it could ruin your professional reputation. I'm willing to take that risk because I'm absolutely confident in my analysis." She opened another file on her laptop, a detailed breakdown of Reed's algorithm, pointing out all its weaknesses and potential points of failure. "Here and here are the critical vulnerabilities. When the data volume exceeds 80% of the maximum estimated load, a cascade failure will begin. This is inevitable with the current architecture." Holder studied her analysis for a few minutes, then looked up. "You mentioned that you originally developed this algorithm. Why then did Reed Merrick present it to us?" Faith hesitated for a moment, but decided to tell the truth. "Because he stole my work and presented it as his own. And when I tried to defend my rights, he got me fired from the company." "Do you have any proof?" "I have all versions of the code with timestamps showing the progress of development. Besides," she pointed to the screen, "the code speaks for itself. Reed doesn't understand how the algorithm works, so he couldn't implement it correctly and eliminate critical flaws." Holder tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. "Let's say I believe you. What do you propose?" "I'm offering my version of the algorithm, fully optimized, without vulnerabilities and with additional features that aren't in TechStream's version. My system not only works stably under high loads, but also provides an additional 15% in resource savings." "And what do you want in return?" Faith took a deep breath. This was a critical moment. "I want to work on this project, not as a consultant, but as a full-fledged employee of Apex Logistics, with the opportunity to develop and improve the system." Holder looked at her intently, assessing her. "You understand that if we accept your offer, it will lead to a direct conflict with TechStream? They could sue us for breach of contract." "Not necessarily," Faith objected. "You can use the flaws in their system as legal grounds for terminating the contract. Besides, my new version of the algorithm is significantly different from the one they sold you. It's not a modification of their code, but a completely new development." She opened another file on her laptop, a detailed business analysis with calculations of potential savings and efficiency gains. "Here are the numbers that speak for themselves. By implementing my solution, Apex Logistics will be able to reduce its logistics costs by approximately 20% in the first year and up to 35% over the next 3 years. That's tens of millions of dollars in net savings." Holder studied the data presented, and Faith noticed a gleam in his eyes, the kind of gleam that experienced business people get when they see a great opportunity. "Your 15 minutes were up 10 minutes ago, Miss Langley," he said finally, glancing at his watch. "But I think we need a little more time. Would you like to continue this conversation over lunch?" Faith felt a rush of warmth inside her, a mixture of relief and triumph. She had interested Holder so much that he was willing to give her much more time than he had planned. "I'd love to, Mr. Holder." "Vance, please," he smiled, rising from the table. "Let's discuss the details in a less formal setting." They left the office and headed for the elevator. On the way, Holder asked Faith technical questions about her algorithm, and she answered confidently and competently, feeling their mutual understanding grow with each passing minute. Over lunch at a small but elegant restaurant nearby, the conversation became even more candid. Holder asked Faith about her career, education, and vision for the future of the logistics industry. She, in turn, demonstrated a deep understanding of Apex Logistics' business processes and offered several innovative ideas for the company's development. "You know, Faith," Holder said as they were finishing lunch, "I'm impressed not only by your technical knowledge, but also by your understanding of the business side of things. That's a rare combination." Thank you, she replied sincerely. I've always believed that technology should serve business objectives, not exist for its own sake. Holder nodded, clearly pleased with her answer. I accept your offer, he said, leaning forward. But on one condition, I want you to head up the technology side of our logistics platform, not just as a developer, but as the technical director of the project. Faith felt her breath catch. This was much more than she had expected. Technical director? But I've never held a management position. Sometimes the best leaders come from those who never sought leadership, Holder remarked philosophically. You have vision, technical knowledge, and, just as important, integrity of character. You could have just sold us your algorithm and left, but instead you want to work on developing it. That says a lot. He took a sip of wine and continued. Of course, there will be a 3-month trial period. During that time, you will assemble your team and implement your system. If everything goes as you promise, the position will become permanent. Faith couldn't believe what was happening. Just this morning, she was unemployed, with a tarnished reputation and uncertain prospects, and now she was being offered a management position at one of the largest logistics companies in the country. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Holder smiled. Come to the office tomorrow at 9 in the morning. My assistant will prepare all the necessary documents. In that case, yes. Faith smiled back, feeling a rush of excitement building inside her. I gladly accept your offer. Excellent. Holder raised his glass. To new beginnings and to justice, which sometimes prevails in this world after all. They clinked glasses, and Faith felt that a new chapter was beginning in her life, a chapter in which she would finally receive the recognition she deserved and be able to realize her potential without having to fight for every breath. On her way home, she called Ashton to share the news. You won't believe it, she said, barely containing her excitement. Holder offered me the position of technical director. What? Seriously? Ashton's voice sounded genuinely surprised and happy. That's amazing, Faith. I knew you could do it, but this is beyond my wildest dreams. It's all thanks to you, she said sincerely. Without your help, none of this would have been possible. Nonsense. I just set up the meeting. The rest is all you. When do you start? Tomorrow. Can you believe it? He wants me to start right away. And by the way, she paused, I was thinking, would you like to join my team? I need people I can trust. There was silence on the line. Ashton, are you there? Yes, I just didn't expect that. Are you sure? Absolutely. You're a competent programmer and the only one who supported me when everyone else turned their backs on me. People like you are worth their weight in gold. Then yes, of course. His voice sounded excited. We just need to resign from TechStream properly so as not to arouse suspicion. Of course. Be careful, Reed mustn't suspect anything until we're ready. After talking to Ashton, Faith felt a surge of energy and determination. She opened her laptop and began to draw up a detailed plan of action for the coming weeks, forming a team, developing an implementation strategy, preparing to terminate her contract with TechStream. For the first time in a long time, Faith Langley felt that she was in control of her own destiny. The stolen algorithm that had caused her humiliation and downfall was now becoming a springboard to new heights. And somewhere deep inside, she was eagerly anticipating the moment when Reed Merrick would find out who was now calling the shots at Apex Logistics. Faith's first month at Apex Logistics flew by in a flash. She immersed herself in creating a new route optimization system, working 12 to 14 hours a day. Vance Holder gave her a private office and complete freedom in forming her team. Ashton joined her 2 weeks later, resigning from TechStream under the pretext of personal circumstances. Reed Merrick didn't even try to keep him. All his attention was focused on the problems with implementing the stolen algorithm, which were becoming increasingly apparent. How's our friend Reed doing? Faith asked as she and Ashton had lunch in the Apex cafeteria. He's on the verge of a nervous breakdown, Ashton replied, unable to hide his satisfaction. The system crashes every time the load exceeds 70%, and he doesn't understand why. He's tried 3 times to get something out of the development team, but no luck. No one knows the algorithm like you do. Faith smiled. There was something almost poetically fair about the stolen but incomplete code becoming a source of problems for the thief. "What about Tessa and the others? How are they?" "Tessa asked about you." Ashton lowered his voice. "I hinted that you're in a much higher position now. She was impressed and seems to be having doubts about the official version of your dismissal." "Interesting," Faith said thoughtfully. "She's an excellent data analyst. We could use someone like that on our team. Do you think we should approach her?" "Not yet. Let's get our system up and running first so we have something to show for ourselves. Then we can think about expanding the team." Work on the new version of the algorithm was progressing faster than even Holder had expected. Faith implemented several innovative approaches that not only solved the peak load problem, but also significantly improved the overall performance of the system. 6 weeks after starting work, she presented the first fully functional version of the system to the senior management of Apex Logistics. The presentation took place in the company's main conference room. Faith stood in front of the projector, feeling nervous but not afraid. She was completely confident in her product. "This is a next-generation logistics system," she began, looking into the eyes of the assembled executives. "Unlike the solution that was previously proposed, our system is capable of handling an unlimited number of simultaneous routes without any loss of performance." She launched a demonstration showing how the system handled various load scenarios. "Take a look at these metrics." Faith pointed to the graph on the right side of the screen. Even with a 200-fold increase in load, the system's response time only increases by 12%. This is an unprecedented result in the industry. Vance Holder, sitting in the front row, nodded approvingly. The other executives watched the presentation intently, taking notes and whispering to each other. "But that's only part of what makes our system unique," Faith continued. "We've also implemented machine learning algorithms that allow the system to adapt to changing conditions in real time." She switched the presentation to another demonstration, a simulation of trucks operating in a city where a sudden traffic accident blocked the main route. The system instantly rerouted all affected vehicles, minimizing delays. "That's impressive, Miss Langley," said one of the directors after the presentation. "When will the system be ready for implementation in a production environment?" "We can start the migration as early as next week," Faith replied confidently. "The transition will be gradual to minimize risks. Full implementation will take about a month." After the presentation, Holder invited Faith into his office. "Amazing work," he said when they were alone. "To be honest, I didn't expect such results in such a short time." "Thank you." Faith couldn't hide her pride. "But this is just the beginning. I have ideas for further development of the system that could open up completely new opportunities for Apex." "I'm sure you do," Holder smiled. "But first, let's take care of some unfinished business." He pressed a button on his phone. "Laura, please call the lawyers and prepare the documents for the contract with TechStream." An hour later, the heads of the legal department gathered in Holder's office. Faith sat next to him, feeling somewhat nervous. This was new territory for her. "Now, gentlemen," Holder began, "Miss Langley has presented compelling evidence that the system provided to us by TechStream has critical flaws that render it unsuitable for our purposes. Furthermore, these flaws were known to the supplier at the time of sale, which is a breach of contract." The chief legal counsel, an elderly man with an attentive gaze, nodded. "This gives us grounds to terminate the contract without penalty. However, I must warn you that TechStream may contest this decision." "Let them try," Holder replied calmly. "We have all the technical evidence we need. Prepare a notice of termination. I want it sent tomorrow morning." The next day, Faith was working in her office when there was a knock at the door. It was Laura, Holder's assistant. "Miss Langley, Mr. Holder is asking for you. TechStream is on the line." Faith felt her pulse quicken. The moment she had both been waiting for and dreading had arrived. The conversation was already underway on speakerphone in Holder's office. Reed Merrick's voice sounded tense and aggressive. "Completely unacceptable. We spent months developing this system specifically to meet your requirements." "Mr. Merrick," Holder replied calmly, "the letter you received clearly states the reasons for terminating the contract. Your system does not meet the agreed specifications and cannot handle the stated load." "These are temporary difficulties," Reed objected. "We are already working on fixing the problems. Give us another 2 weeks." "I'm afraid we've already made our decision." Holder caught Faith's eye and nodded slightly to her. "In fact, we are already implementing another solution that fully meets our requirements." "What?" Reed's voice sounded genuinely astonished. "That's impossible. You couldn't have found a replacement so quickly. And besides, our contract stipulates—" "Mr. Merrick," Holder interrupted, "I'm going to hand you over to our new technical director, who will explain the situation to you in more detail." He handed the phone to Faith. She took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline rush through her veins. "Hello, Mr. Merrick," she said calmly and clearly. "You're speaking to the new technical director, and unfortunately for you, we no longer require the services of TechStream." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Reed's strained voice came through. "Langley? Is that you?" "Yes, it's me," Faith confirmed, not hiding her satisfaction. "Surprised?" "But how—" Reed was clearly speechless. "You work for Apex? Since when?" "Long enough to develop a system that actually works," Faith replied, "unlike your half-baked attempt to implement a stolen algorithm." "This is outrageous," Reed exploded. "You stole our work. TechStream is going to sue Apex and you personally." "Go ahead," Faith replied calmly. "I have all the evidence that I developed the original algorithm, including all versions of the code with timestamps. And you have— what? A broken system and a falling reputation?" Heavy breathing could be heard on the line. "You'll regret this, Langley," Reed hissed. I'm afraid you have a lot to regret, Mr. Merrick," Faith interrupted. "Now, if you don't mind, I have a lot of work to do. Have a nice day." She hung up and looked at Holder. He was smiling. "I must admit that was very satisfying," he said. "Although I'm not a fan of personal vendettas in business, in this case, justice really did prevail." "Thank you for giving me this opportunity," Faith said sincerely. "It means more to me than you can imagine." Don't forget that we still have to implement your system," Holder reminded her. "Reed Merrick can be dangerous when he's cornered. I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to sabotage our efforts." "We'll be ready," Faith replied confidently. His only advantage was that he was in control. Now he doesn't have that advantage. In the weeks that followed, news that Apex Logistics had terminated its contract with TechStream and hired the latter's former employee as its technical director spread throughout the industry. Many companies that had worked with TechStream began reviewing their contracts and requesting additional guarantees. Reed Merrick's reputation was seriously damaged. Rumors began circulating in the industry that he had stolen someone else's design and failed to implement it properly. Some TechStream customers had already begun looking for alternative suppliers. Meanwhile, Faith continued to work on implementing her system at Apex Logistics. The initial results exceeded even the most optimistic forecasts. Logistics operations became 25% more efficient, and costs fell by almost a third. 2 months after implementation began, Faith received an unexpected call from Tessa Price, her former colleague at TechStream. "Faith, it's Tessa. I don't know if you remember me." "Of course I do," Faith replied, surprised by the call. "How are you?" "Honestly, terrible," Tessa sighed. "TechStream is falling apart before our eyes. After losing the Apex contract, Reed has completely lost it. He's blaming everyone for incompetence and threatening to fire people." "It's unbearable." "I'm sorry to hear that," Faith said sincerely. "But why did you call me?" I wanted to apologize for not supporting you back then when you were fired. I knew Reed was being unfair, but I was afraid of losing my job. I have a disabled child and I couldn't take any risks." "I understand, Tessa. I really do." "And also," Tessa hesitated, "I heard you're now the technical director at Apex. Is that true?" "Yes, it is." Are you considering expanding your team?" Tessa asked cautiously. "I know it's presumptuous of me, but I can't work with Reed anymore. And it's not just me. Lots of people are looking to leave." Faith thought about it. She had been planning to expand her department and needed experienced people. "You know what, Tessa? Send me your resume. And pass the same message on to others you trust. I can't promise anything, but I'll definitely consider you." Over the next week, Faith received resumes from 6 former TechStream colleagues, including Tessa. After interviewing them, she decided to hire 4, including Tessa, whose analytical skills and industry knowledge were undeniable. The transition of talented employees from TechStream to Apex Logistics was another blow to Reed Merrick's reputation. Customers began to doubt the company's ability to fulfill its obligations with such an outflow of specialists. 3 months after implementing Faith's system, Apex Logistics became a recognized leader in the logistics technology industry. Holder officially confirmed Faith as technical director on a permanent basis, with a significant salary increase and stock options. "You have exceeded all my expectations, Miss Langley," he said during the official reception marking the completion of the implementation project. "Apex is proud to have you as part of our team." "Thank you for your trust," Faith replied, "but we're just getting started. I have plans for further development of the system that could take the company to a whole new level." Holder nodded approvingly. "That's the kind of attitude I value in my key employees. By the way, have you heard about the upcoming Tech Logistics Industry Conference? I think it's a great opportunity to showcase our new system to the entire industry." The Tech Logistics Conference was the largest annual event in the field of logistics technology. Companies from all over the country presented their innovations and signed major contracts there. "That's a great idea," Faith agreed. "I'll prepare a presentation that demonstrates all the advantages of our system." "Excellent," Holder raised his glass, "to our successful collaboration and future victories." The Tech Logistics Conference was held at the largest exhibition center in Dallas. Representatives from hundreds of companies gathered to learn about the latest trends and innovations in the industry. The Apex Logistics presentation was scheduled for the second day in the main conference hall. Faith put on her best business suit and arrived early to check the equipment and gather her thoughts. The hall gradually filled with people. Faith noticed representatives of major logistics and technology companies, investors, and journalists. Then her gaze fell on a familiar face in the far corner of the hall, Reed Merrick, pale and haggard, sitting alone, away from the main crowd of participants. Their eyes met for a moment, and Faith saw a mixture of hatred and defeat in his gaze. But she did not feel the expected triumph, only a slight sadness that a person could sink so low because of their own greed and ambition. Holder introduced Faith to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our technical director, the architect of a revolutionary logistics optimization system, Faith Langley." The hall greeted her with applause. Faith approached the podium, feeling the unreality of the situation. Just a few months ago, she was unemployed, with a tarnished reputation and an uncertain future. And now she was standing in front of industry leaders, preparing to present her creation. "Good morning," she began in a confident voice. "Today I want to tell you about a system that is changing the rules of the game in the world of logistics." For the next 30 minutes, Faith demonstrated the capabilities of her system, explaining the technical details in accessible language and emphasizing the business benefits. The audience responded with undisguised interest. People took notes, photographed slides, and asked questions. "How did you solve the problem of peak loads?" asked a representative of a large transportation company. "That's the Achilles heel of most existing systems." "The secret lies in a special algorithm for dynamic resource reallocation," Faith replied, without going into details protected by patent. "It allows the system to adapt to any level of load without losing performance." After the presentation, a line formed around Faith with people eager to discuss opportunities for cooperation. Representatives of technology companies offered partnerships, transportation companies were interested in purchasing licenses, and several venture capitalists hinted at their interest in financing further development. Holder watched with obvious satisfaction. "You made quite an impression, Miss Langley," he said when the last visitor had left. "I've already received 3 preliminary offers to sign contracts. And that's just the beginning." Faith glanced around the room and noticed that Reed Merrick had disappeared. She wondered if he had stayed to hear the end of the presentation, or if he had left early, unable to bear witness to what could have been his triumph if he hadn't chosen the path of deception. That evening, returning to her apartment after a long day at the conference, Faith felt a strange sense of calm. She had achieved what she had dreamed of: recognition, success, justice. However, instead of euphoria, she felt more like peace and clarity of mind. She picked up her phone, found the contact labeled Mom, and pressed call. After a few rings, Lydia Langley answered. "Hello, Faith? Is something wrong?" "Hi, Mom," Faith replied calmly. "No, everything's fine. I just wanted to tell you some news." "What news?" Her mother's voice sounded incredulous. "You changed jobs again?" "Not exactly. I'm now the technical director at Apex Logistics. Today I presented our new system at the largest industry conference." There was silence on the line. "Technical director?" Lydia finally asked. That's good. What kind of system is it?" Faith briefly explained the essence of her development without going into technical details that her mother wouldn't understand anyway. "And this is all your work?" Lydia's voice sounded unusually surprised. "Yes, Mom. My development." "Well, congratulations," Lydia said after a pause. "Although I still think finance is more reliable. Take Laura, for example." "Mom," Faith interrupted her gently, "I'm not calling to compare myself to Laura or seek your approval. I just wanted to share an important event in my life with you." There was another pause, this one longer. "You've changed," Lydia finally said. "You wouldn't have talked to me like that before." "I've grown up, Mom, and I've learned to value myself." "So now you're too important to listen to your mother's advice?" Faith smiled, not bitterly, but with understanding. "No, Mom, I'll always listen to you. But now I also trust my own opinion. And you know what? It makes me happier." She expected resentment or indignation, but Lydia surprised her. "Maybe you're right," she said reluctantly. "When's your next presentation? I could come and watch." It was the closest thing to approval Faith had ever heard from her mother, and for the first time in her life, she realized that she no longer needed that approval as desperately as she once had. "I'll let you know, Mom. I'd love for you to come." After the conversation, Faith stepped out onto the balcony of her apartment and looked at the night lights of Dallas. Her path had not been easy. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, injustice, but she had not broken down or given up. Instead, she had used these trials as stepping stones to her true potential. Reed Merrick wanted to destroy her career, but ended up being the catalyst for her success. Her mother spent her entire life undermining her self-confidence, but unwittingly strengthened her character. All the obstacles that life threw in her path ultimately made her stronger. Faith Langley finally found what she had always been looking for, not just professional success, but belief in herself and her abilities. And that was more important than any title or position. It was a true victory that no one could take away from her.